Good morning and welcome to the Being Your Own CEO Success Circle. We get together because we enjoy each other's company, we love experimenting and sharing new discoveries and some good discussion, and we sometimes even do a little business together. So welcome here. This morning we're going to be discussing artificial intelligence with a special guest, Peter Scott. And so we will just begin by having everybody introduce themselves. So David, you were here first, so away you go.
Hello, I'm Dave Flannery. I'm with Affordable Websites for Small Business. You can contact me at the number above my shoulder, or go to my website. I'm in Rock Falls, Illinois. I'm watching the squirrels outside eat my bird feed and being entertained. Our YouTube is working beautifully, and so is the streaming on our website. So back to you, LowellAnn.
Right on. Thank you. Let me see. Who is here next? Paul, I think you were here next.
Yeah, good morning, LowellAnn. My name is Paul Murray. Company is TTG International Management. We like to take people who are on their business journey and we offer them sometimes a little direction, and other times we help them with their heavy lifting. We'd like you to think of us as your business Sherpas. And I'm located just around the corner from LowellAnn in the Cook Street Village on Vancouver Island.
Right.
Back to you.
Good to see you. David.
Yeah, Javita's in YouTube right now. Says good day to all and hello to Paul.
Oh, good morning, Javita. Come and join us if you wish. You're always welcome. Now, Peter, I don't know whether your presentation includes an introduction of yourself, or if you would like to introduce yourself separately. Your choice.
If you have anything ready, then you can go ahead and use it. Otherwise, I can tell people about myself. It's one of the subjects I know something about.
Well, basically, what I just did a bit of research and know that Peter lives in Metchosin, which is also on Vancouver Island, not far from here, and he has a regular podcast that he does on artificial intelligence, and he also has done a few TED Talks on the topic. So I'm really looking forward to what he has to share with us. Is that good enough? Fred, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, chasing dogs around as normal. And I'm also on Vancouver Island in Langford, where it's 4 degrees centigrade, cloudy today so far. And I'm the creator of Our Future Leaders, where we assist young people to gain those all-important skills, including communication and leadership skills, so that they can help us cope with all the challenges that we have and become the leaders. So I believe every child deserves a wonderful future, and so we try and assist them. If anyone knows of anyone who is interested in setting up a youth group to help them with their communication leadership skills, please reach out to me. Back to you, LowellAnn.
Right on. Hey, did your group enjoy using Padlet?
I asked them about Padlet, and I sent them the link, and they said they'll check into it. They haven't checked into it. I thought they might be familiar with it because it is used often in school systems, but apparently their school system here does not use Padlet. So they said they'll check into it. But they're definitely enjoying Butter. Butter is very, very popular. Thank you.
Cool. And Vivek, how are you doing this morning, afternoon, evening?
Namaste. My name is Vivekanand. People call me Vivek. I believe in simplicity. Simplicity is the ultimate in sophistication, as said by Steve Jobs and Leonardo da Vinci. So usually I say something different in my introduction, but today I'm going to go with if technology confuses you, avoid the cowboys, work with the Indian. Let the Indian handle technology. You live a unified, simplified, amplified life. At Wake, we wake up your potential. So that's my introduction. I am in Reading, United Kingdom, England, and it's a moderate day, I should say. It's raining since morning, and when it rains, it is not that cold. Otherwise, it is cold. So,
Right on. So welcome here, Vivek. And we haven't seen Alana. She may come in. So I will just finish by saying at LowellAnn.com, I love providing support for solopreneurs and supporting them in their online presence. So, David, I see you waving again.
Yeah, Javita says Vancouver majority today. I will not interrupt Peter if he's working with any other comments until the end of the show.
Oh dear. That's cute. So this morning we have a special guest, and it all came about because after taking a month off, the month of December, while I was combining websites and doing stupid things, we had a conversation about topics and moving forward for the new year. And I invited everyone to recommend any people that would be good guests. And Fred jumped on it and sent me a couple of recommendations. And so thanks to Fred, we have Peter Scott with us. And he's going to talk about artificial intelligence. And I was looking at some of the items that are online about artificial intelligence, and I noticed that in Peter's TED Talk, he talked about our need for all of us to be futurists. So I think somewhere in your podcast, you're introduced as author, speaker, and futurist. So, yeah. So, and I noticed also in that TED Talk, you spoke about the speed at which change is upon us. How in the early days, we here comes Alana. In early days, we were the ones that were pushing technology, and now it seems to have turned around, and we're now feeling as though we're being pushed by technology. So that TED Talk, I have provided the link in the comments or in the chat here. So it's well worth a watch. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And before we get into presentation, Alana, you're just in time if you'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm sorry I'm late. I was finishing up some other work. Excuse me. Hi, everyone. I'm Alana, coming to you from Ireland. My company is ALB Digital Marketing Solutions, where I write content and copy to increase sales and conversions.
Mm-hmm. Has spring hit Ireland yet?
No. Although our weather's been kind of weird. It's been up and down. Like one day it's warm and the next day it's freezing. It's very odd. Like we're getting hit with 2 storms this week. one tomorrow and one Friday. So it's rain though. It's not snow. It's just rain.
Is that right? Well, I have to rub it in here. I mean, this comes from my days of connecting with all my old friends in the Arctic. So in February, I always have to tell everybody the daffodils are in bloom.
We actually have a daffodil day here. Yeah, it's called Daffodil Day, and it's a day to raise cancer awareness, and you donate money to cancer and all that sort of thing. But I don't think it's until March. Maybe April. I don't know. I don't think we're seeing Daffodil Day for a while.
Well,
we're just starting to see them come up.
Yeah,
they haven't flowered yet, but they're coming up.
I'm always looking for the crocus. There's a crocus in my front yard, and when I see that, then I know spring's around the corner, but that purple flower hasn't appeared yet.
Well, and I should share with everybody, when I lived in the Arctic in Yellowknife, I think it was a cancer association that imported all the daffodils from here in BC. And at this time of year, it's still very much winter up there. And so we used to fill our offices with bouquets of daffodils because we needed some reminder that there might be a spring coming soon. So, yeah, that's my favorite flower. Can't you tell? Okay, so today we're going to explore the concept of artificial intelligence. I guess if you looked it up in Wikipedia or whatever, it would be defined as machine learning. Is that too narrow a definition, Peter?
Well, that's that's a topic of some academic debate that we probably don't need to resolve here.
Okay. But we did, I mean, we are, all of us here are concerned with what goes on within the whole technology world. So I know that everybody's going to be very interested in what you want to share with us. So over to you, Peter.
Well, thank you very much, LowellAnn. Thank you, Fred, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to meet all of you, even though I can't see most of you. That's one of the challenges of technology. And I was inspired by all of your mission statements there. So here's mine. I'm Peter Scott. I help people understand and leverage artificial intelligence so that they can survive and thrive through the revolution of exponential technology. Yeah. And there's so much to this. A little quote here from Charlie Chaplin that I like to use to remind us of where our hearts should be in learning about all of this. And just so that you have some idea that you're listening to someone that's been doing this for a while. Oh, before we get there, I stuck this in for some special content because it's the Olympics. And hey, here is a robot that can curl.
Oh, my goodness.
It had beat the South Korea's top teams. It is called Curly, of course. And it does everything except the sweeping. So I had to stick that in. But so you have some background on why I'm talking about this. I have given classes on this at the University of Victoria. This spring, I'll be doing that at Simon Fraser, continuing studies. I have spoken to British Parliament in their last session that they had in person before they had to go virtual. And as you've heard, I've given a TEDx talk. I also have a podcast which goes out every week. And this is because I have a huge passion for explaining this topic that is so deep so broad. And what we're going to talk about today is what is the surprise factor of artificial intelligence? What are its learning models, some of its issues? What does it mean for jobs? And what do we do next? But first, the elephant in the room. Why should this matter? Why should you care about this? Isn't it just another technology? We don't need to get that excited about cell phones, do we? Or cable TV, or even YouTube? Why is artificial intelligence such a big deal? Well, for one thing, people don't understand it, and they're aware that that's a problem. There are many surveys that all come out with about the same answers, showing that about half the population doesn't know what artificial intelligence is, thinks they ought to know more, but don't know how to find out, and don't trust it. And that but they're aware that it's playing a big part in their life. And we're going to look at some of the ways that might be true. But to get back to why is this is a big deal? To try and encapsulate that in the amount of time that we have, my go-to quote is from Andrew Ng, who is not given to florid overstatement. So when he says artificial intelligence is the new electricity, I pay attention. It's not the biggest overstatement out there or grandest statement. The CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, compared it to the invention of fire. But we can actually do a lot more with the comparison with electricity, because you can think back to your history books and the stories of the first battery and the first electric motor and the first dynamo, and think about what ensued from the discovery of the ability to manipulate electrons. That led to things like the digital computer. It led to Twitter, social media. It led to artificial intelligence. Now, 120 years ago, you might have foreseen that electricity would lead to smaller motors and electric lights being used in many different applications. You wouldn't have foreseen those other things. That's too many revolutions away to see. So while we cannot, by definition, appreciate what artificial intelligence is going to do, we can liken it to that and ask ourselves, what would the impact be of an equivalent change? And what is it that's being accelerated here? It's the electrification of thinking. Perhaps the last bastion of what what sets humans apart. But that is the potential. And what does that mean for us? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? On the good side, we have people like this. Top left is Ray Kurzweil, inventor of the optical character reader and the digital music synthesizer, director of engineering for Google. And at the bottom right is Peter Diamandis, founder of the X Prize for private spaceflight entrepreneurism. And these gentlemen are unequivocally bullish on the promise of artificial intelligence. They say that and other exponential technology will foster in an age that will carry the promise to make us immortal, which is about as far as you can get on the utopia end of a scale as possible, right? Live forever. I don't think it gets better than that. On the other side, we have names and faces that you also know. Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Elon Musk. Stephen Hawking, before he died, revised his estimate of how long the human race has to survive from 1,000 years down to 100 and connected that to artificial intelligence. Bill Gates and Elon Musk made other statements you're probably familiar with along the same lines. And so here we have two sets of geniuses that would not dare to compare myself to, and yet they separate out into polar opposite camps. The immortality versus the destruction of the human race. As futurists, you really can't get further apart than that. And here we are stuck in the middle. What are we to make of this? How are we to tell the difference? If you're confused, well, you have every right to be. How are you supposed to decide from this what artificial intelligence is going to do for the human race. And one of my recent guests, Stuart Russell, who is a prominent voice in artificial intelligence risk debates and the author of the most widely used textbook on the subject, said that the thing we should be focusing on now is not prediction. It's about changing the future. The difference between these predictions amounts to our uncertainty about how big a part we are going to play in this. And that is huge enough to make that difference between utopia and Armageddon. So you get an idea of just how big this thing, artificial intelligence, is. But it's kind of like the elephant and the six blind men, right? It takes a long time. We're not going to get around to all six parts of the elephant today. I have to just kind of give you an idea that there's something large and hairy out there. One of the reasons that it's difficult for us to appreciate this is kind of summed up in this quote by Bill Gates. It says we overestimate the change that's going to happen in 2 years. We underestimate what's going to happen in 10. And if you look at this as exponential growth, it kind of makes sense. We sort of draw that red line curve, red line anticipating where we're going to be in 10 years. And of course, look how far off we are. Why? It's the phenomenon of exponential growth. That's that black curve going up. We do not have an intuitive appreciation for that. One of the ways of illustrating this is with an old parable which you probably heard. It goes back to 1,000 years ago when there was a king who liked to play chess and had defeated, or at least they had allowed him to win, everyone who was around him. And then one day this wise man or old man came into the kingdom just wandering through, and the king said, "Hey, let's play chess." And the old man said, "Well, can we make it interesting?" The king said, "What do you have in mind?" And the man said, "Well, if I win, because I like rice, I want rice. And I want you to give me 1 grain on the first square of this chessboard. See that little white dot in the top left?" And king said, "Oh, great, no problem." Man said, "No, I'm not done yet. I also want 2 grains on the second square, 4 on the next, and 8 on that, and just keep doubling it, okay?" And the king sort of counted up as far as he could, which was the end of the first row. 128 grains. Heck, that's less than a handful. No problem. Of course, he lost, or we wouldn't have a story. Well, that's when he discovered, through some mathematics that may not have existed then, but catch the spirit, that by the time you got to the end of the board, you would have enough rice to carpet India to a depth of 1 meter. Well, if it was all piled on that 1 square, it would be 1/4 of a light year high. That's a lot of rice. And that's the power of exponential growth. And it's represented here by these numbers. Obviously, you can see they ran out of dots by the end of the first row. So now they start showing numbers, and you get 1 million, there's the M, and then you get into the billions, which they use with G. You use G for giga for, and then you get T for tera, and so on. Now, that's what happens when you double things, is you have that enormous amount of growth. In nature, things grow by doubling, like our cells start from 1 tiny little ovum and then double, but they do not double for that many times. If they doubled even 32 times, that's the first half of the chessboard, grass would be 10 miles high. Sorry, 10,000 miles high. And it doesn't. But what has been doubling already more than 32 times is the rate of performance of computers. We're used to that. We've heard the stories about that. But the power of this chessboard analogy comes in the second half of the chessboard. And Ray Kurzweil was the one who pointed this out. He said, if you look at the grains of rice, the first half of the chessboard, by the time you get up to the 2 billion at the end of the first half, that's a large field. We know what that looks like. We have an understanding for that. There is now a big gap in our understanding between that and the last square on the chessboard where you cover the whole country. You just can't appreciate that. And yet we are on target for our computer power to keep doing that. to keep doubling at that same rate to get to there. Can you imagine what that's going to be like? Me neither. But it would be a good idea to be ready for a lot, right? Some of the examples of the ways that this has had an impact. There's a game much like chess, black and white pieces, square board, called Go. Maybe some of you played it and familiar with it. Very popular in China and Asia. Here you see the Go champion Lee Sedol being beaten by an artificial intelligence in a match that wasn't expected to have that result for another 10 years. But that was the impact of artificial intelligence. That, and not only that, but 1 year later, the same company, DeepMind, created an AI that within 3 days was capable of beating that version of the program 100 games to nothing, without even being told, without even being given examples of how to play good game. It was just given the rules and allowed to play itself. Wow. Now, how do we make sense of this? This is an important thing, because when we look at a result like this, when we look at performance like this, our natural tendency is to equate this with what humans would be and go, no one on the planet is that good a Go player. This thing must be ready to take us over. But what it really illustrates is that the game of Go is one that was capable of being played by a machine that was very good at recognizing and reproducing patterns. It's a bit of a slight to Go players, to be honest, or you could take it that way, but that is the way that it happened. It does not mean that this thing has any cognitive capability behind it at all, other than being able to play Go, but not the same way that humans do. Continuing this theme of how much are things changing and how fast, that sometimes does this, doesn't it? You're not going to show... Sometimes this happens when I share a slide. Fair enough. Let's talk about the convergence of technologies. Because one of the things that accelerates development and the impact of something like artificial intelligence faster than we can expect is when technologies start overlapping with each other. So here we've got global positioning, the cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and edge computing. And represented in terms of what we know about them, what we can do about them with these circles. But as we get better and expand our knowledge of those things, they start to overlap, and you get a synergy between them that allows us to do things with the combination of those. And at the intersection of those things, you have now autonomous vehicles. Required all four of those things to happen. But now you've got that. And that's an example of something showing up as a result of these technologies expanding. That is the intersection of all of those things. We're going to talk about different kinds of models of how artificial intelligence can learn, so you can get a flavor for its methods. But they all, and so the ones I'm going to talk about are supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning. I'll explain what those are. All of them depend upon big data. This is the difference between AI and humans. It needs a lot more data, much more. But then it can start to do things with it that include things that we can't do. Now, supervised learning is when you have data that says what the right answer should be. For instance, handwriting recognition, you can give it handwriting and samples of what the correct text would be. Train it on enough of those samples, it will learn to recognize other handwriting. You can train an AI to do French-English translation by feeding it Hansard, the record of Canadian Parliament, because it must be translated completely accurately between English and French. And so you have this huge repository of language samples that are a training set. Another example is unsupervised learning, where you say, well, here's all this data, and I don't know what it means, but maybe you can tell me. And one of the examples of that was a study that was done where some ophthalmology researchers fed images of people's retinas, that is a picture there of the back of your eyeball, into an AI along with data about the people it belonged to, like gender, smoking history, diseases, age, and so forth. And they said, does anything about the image predict the metadata? Expecting and finding that you could, yes, tell, for instance, certain diseases from the eyeball, which is what ophthalmologists can do themselves. But then it told them something they didn't know. It said, I can tell the gender of the person that this image belongs to. Now, no one had ever found that before. In fact, even after they were told that the AI had discovered this, they went back and looked at the images. The ophthalmologist couldn't do better than chance. But the AI can predict the gender to 97% accuracy. It's not clear how, but that information is in the image somehow. So here it's given us information, new knowledge that we didn't know before. Somehow your gender is encoded at the back of your eye. There are easier ways to find out someone's gender than looking into their eye, but it's new knowledge, it's science. And then we have reinforcement learning, which is where you train something to do a task and you give it a reward when it does it a little bit better and not when it doesn't. It's not like an electronic biscuit. You just give it a number and say, make this number as big as possible. And it perturbs its actions to favor that. You can train a self-driving car that way. You can train a robot to pick up packages that way. So those are three types of learning models. I'm going to talk about the prominent issues in artificial intelligence today and start by talking about the difference between humans and AI to illustrate what it's good for and what it isn't. So we can learn from as little as one example. My favorite for this, which I made up, although other people seem to have originated it as well, I guess there's nothing new under the sun, is to ask you to imagine a mythical creature that I will call a hippocorn. It's not terribly imaginative. It's got the body of a hippopotamus, head of a hippopotamus, but the horn of a unicorn. All right, hippocorn. Now, everyone got a picture of that in your mind? Mm-hmm. Hippopotamus plus horn, mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. So from now on, this is actually zero-shot learning. You've never encountered a hippocorn. But now, if you ever see one, you will go, oh, that's hippocorn. That's what Peter was talking about. You could recognize it without even having seen it once. We can recognize all kinds of things from even just one example, but artificial intelligence requires probably 100,000 examples to start getting good, preferably more. Which means any field where you don't have that amount of data is relatively safe, but there are a lot of things now where we do have that amount of data. Like, think how much there is on YouTube and the internet. So humans, we can do pattern recognition and we can reproduce patterns. With AI, it can do the same thing. And with enough data, it can do better than we can. But we can generalize this to other tasks. We call this transfer learning. So you learn how to do something in art. You can generalize that to, say, literature. AI cannot at all yet. We, of course, have a limited amount of storage. It's only allowed to be this big. Artificial intelligence, there's no effective limit. We, for instance, have a limit on the number of things we can focus on at one time. It's called Miller's magic number. It's originally 7 plus or minus 2. It's probably actually less. Artificial intelligence could have no limit to that. So when it gets a general cognitive capability, it could be so far ahead of us that we can't imagine it. We can explain our decisions. AI is very poor at that. It takes a lot of work. But to scale out our capability horizontally, you have to take a human that knows how to do it do something, and then they have to train another human. And the time it takes to train that person is as much as it takes to train the one after that. And each of them requires the same salary. But with AI, once you've trained one of them, the next one and the next 10,000 of them are free. The cost is too small to measure because you're just copying a computer program to do that one thing. In humans, you have to remove bias one person at a time through some kind of training. With AI, of course, if you're going to copy it, then you remove it from the parent, then it's gone from all the children. We can detect bias in humans in several different ways, by actions and other giveaways. But in AI, that bias may be nearly impossible to detect. You have to work at it. You have to know to look for it. And in humans, we have this general cognitive ability, but AI does not. But it can emulate a great many things that we would have thought required it. Now, I've got this great little exercise, participatory, and I'm going to show some pictures of animals. And your job here, when you see the picture, is to call out what it is, what kind of animal are you looking at, as quickly as possible. This works even if I can't hear you, all right? So it doesn't matter, but that's, everyone got the assignment? Going to see a picture? What animal is it? Just call it out straight away.
Dog.
Dogs.
Sheep.
Cats.
Cats.
Owls.
Owls.
Dolphin.
Dolphins.
Goats.
Goats.
Some of you are faster. I'll bet that it took a longer to tell that these are goats because most of you, possibly all of you, are not used to seeing goats in a tree.
Right.
And this is a real undoctored photograph. It was taken in Morocco, where the locals tell the tourists that this is what the goats like to do there, and then they charge them for pictures with the goats. Actually, they go out in the morning and put the goats up in the tree with a ladder, and the goats can't get down. But whereas AI can be trained to recognize all the things that we've seen before, it has a hard time with this image. One of them thinks it's birds, another one thinks it's giraffes, because it's not used to seeing goats in a tree. Mm-hmm. And we have this ability to do a double take. We go, wait a minute, not a bird. Let me look closer. AI does not have that capability. Now, all of these limitations are being worked on, believe me. But that is a fundamental one. It's not a showstopper by any means, but it is a serious issue for it. It means, for instance, things like this stop sign, which has been defaced by some carefully placed graffiti, looks to an AI like a yield sign, which is obviously a problem. Now, the people who put that graffiti on there knew what they were doing. They knew how to fool the AI, but it gives you the clue that the AI is not recognizing this as a stop sign the same way that we do. It's not using the general morphology and color scheme of it to say, well, octagonal, red, 2 feet across, big white letters, stop. Even if it's covered in snow, I know what it is if it's at the right height next to the road. No. Even though it could do a very good job of recognizing stop signs under other circumstances, it's got these weak areas. Now, to talk about jobs, because it's obviously a big issue, then there are headlines like prediction of more or less half of all jobs being automated. That requires some nuance. It's not exactly what they said, but they did use the figure 47%. You can see some visualizations of this. I think this is at quartz.com. You can look for a visualization that was done from that study where you can hover over one of these circles, which represents a segment, and see, for instance, accountants and auditors, 93% likely to be automated, and there's how many people work in it and how much money they make. The actual impact of this is much more nuanced than even this study, which is a huge amount of work. You can see how many fields they covered and measured would indicate, for many reasons that I would love to go into, but have to wait. One of the most obvious ones is autonomous vehicle driving, which is receiving a great deal of attention at the moment. And of course, there's a lot of attention on people being put out of work. If we were to look to the other side of the disruption, we would say sitting down in a truck cab for 14 hours a day is not healthy. No one should have to do that unless they really want to. In the same way that we no longer use children to sweep chimneys. That there should be better choices. So that gives you an idea that there is multiple sides of this debate here. Are there still chimney cleaners? Yes, they use machines. Isn't that better than using children? I'm going to put in something here which is very topical. This is less than 3 weeks old that someone, the OpenAI organization, came out with this AI. And I wanted to show you because I'm kind of excited by it. I went to it and typed in the text in bold. So what should students in a continuing studies class know about artificial intelligence? It answered the rest of it, which is pretty good. And so I'm going to show you this, and for maybe half a minute, we'll get a chance to interact with it, and you can tell me what to tell it. I have an account on this, and you can get an idea of the capabilities of the most leading edge artificial intelligence engine currently in existence. It's trained on a large amount of the internet, which means it can mimic an understanding of text quite well. Here, I'll get started. I'm going to say, let's see, I'll just say compose a poem about this is going on right now, right?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Has anyone got something that you can ask it a question? You can ask it to do something. I asked it to compose a saucy limerick once. I couldn't show you that answer. But it's haiku. We're off by a couple of syllables. It's limerick. Didn't always rhyme, but that's getting kind of fussy. Has anyone got something? Go ahead.
What would be the best job to be in 20 years?
Oh, a great one. Well, there you go.
Here we are.
And I did not even tell it that I was going to play to the audience. So, state of the art in AI right now. Does that not make you think, of course, that this thing has a mind of its own? It does not. But it is very good at manipulating text. What it is essentially is a very sophisticated version of the autocomplete function on your phone or Gmail. Very, very sophisticated. But look what can be done with it. There are several fields of writing that can be automated with this now. Mostly boring ones, like writing accounts of company earnings reports. Now I'm going to show you this video here. Let me make sure we got the sound of what can be done on the visual side of an AI. Actually, we don't need the sound for this. That's right. So if you can't hear, actually you can't see. There we go. Okay. You don't need to listen to this guy. I'll tell you what he's saying anyway. This is the company Magic Leap, and this is their AI Micah, which is presented as this computer-generated avatar. This video is actually several years old at this point. The company went out of business for reasons I'm not entirely clear on, but I don't think it was that the technology was invalid. But more than the animation that you're seeing here, Micah is able to, through a camera and microphone, make eye contact with you, to understand, in some sense, what you're saying, and how you're feeling, and react appropriately and accordingly. Now, imagine that paired with the capability that you just saw in that playground, and you have a potent kind of avatar to present. As I like to say to people, the scenario in the movie Her with Scarlett Johansson, actually never saw her, only heard her, may not be that far off. So this is our demonstration of what's...
Artificial intelligence.
What?
Yes.
Artificial intelligence.
Come on, come to the next slide. There we go. This comes with a raft of issues that are being worked on. You hear a lot of these talked about on my podcast. Bias. How can you find bias? Most certainly can exist in AI, not because of an inherent thing, but because it's propagated through the data that we train it on. And you can have fraud that leads to things like disinformation, huge topic. Explainability. Can you get AI to explain a decision it made? It's very good at making decisions like whether or not to grant someone a loan or an insurance claim. It will do as good as a good human adjuster on that. But getting it to explain why, well, that's harder. Repeating the same result, if that's important, over and over again is a topic. Accountability. Who or what should be held responsible for the actions of, say, a self-driving vehicle? Privacy is an enormous issue because AI is able to break down what we thought were barriers of anonymity with astounding ease. And just job displacement, as we have been talking about. To illustrate what I think is the challenge and the gap. Computers are one kind of exponential growth curve, where other things grow exponentially, just not as quickly, like manufacturing and medicine, environmental science, cognitive science, human nature sort of just eking its way off the bottom axis there. Now, I put it to you that the gap between manufacturing and environmental science is what has resulted in the climate crisis. One thing getting ahead of the other. That shaded gap. But now I ask you to consider, what might this gap represent between computers and human nature? When we get to the point where AI becomes cognitive, conscious, generally intelligent, this gap is going to count for a lot. It's already being exploited in the way that disinformation campaigns that were accelerated by what was actually a bug in the algorithms in YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. They were doing what they were programmed to do, just that the consequence was not foreseen, has literally broken democracy. Now, that's already happened. Where else are we going on this curve? So where do you take this? What do you do with it? Google learned when they surveyed their employees, this is what makes a good Google employee. And it wasn't the technological ability or intellect in learning computers really fast. It was these things. This is what mattered to them the most. This is what they focused on. Of course, these are vital skills for being an entrepreneur. And so the kind of skills that are required more and more in the future are less the technological ability. Yes, we need those as well. But in order to make sure it's directed properly, we need these things. This is part of the training that my institute and colleagues provide for coaches in how to become resilient to this change. We take people up a ladder to resilience through these steps. They start out in a stage of being unconscious, not knowing what it is they're unaware of about the future and what's happening and how fast it's happening. it takes some level of shock to climb up to the next stage. And maybe from what you've seen so far today, there's some level of shock. We're quite good at that part. And then we have to go through other stages. The next one is that people are aware that there's something serious happening, but they have no idea what to do. They're like a deer caught in the headlights. All of us on Vancouver Island know what that looks like. And then we get through different stages, through different means to mastery. Everyone wants to be on mastery, right? Now, to analyze this phenomenon, what this disruption will mean for businesses, I broke them down on 2 axes because people who invent quadrants seem to make a lot of money as thought leaders, so I thought I should try. And the horizontal axis is the business oriented more towards products on the left or services on the right? And is it more of a traditional on the bottom business, or is it a disruptive, an innovator on the top? So in these quadrants, I said, well, what do you have to do to survive and thrive through this disruption? In traditional products, think, selling detergent, something like that. Your competitors, if your competitors are bigger than you, you have a big problem because they can afford AI that scales across the company. Your best assets might be the real estate that you own, like McDonald's likes to say. It's not an area I would want to be in, let alone try and get in. Traditional services, think, say, selling insurance, then you're vulnerable to automation depending on the size of the market. Obviously, again, it's a big industry, and you can an insurer, for instance, could be beaten by someone using AI on actuarial tables to get better, or on big data to construct better and proprietary actuarial tables. You should focus instead on the customer relationship building, the point of contact between your people and the customers as a human relationship. And reassess the roles if you're a big business in your department. Do you still need HR, given the fact that as AI doing those functions right now? Do you still need your own accounting department, given how easy it is to outsource that? In the top left, disruptive products, something like, say, an iPhone, is vulnerable to competition that uses AI for research and development, because AI can actually be very creative. That sounds like a contradiction, but if you think back to the game of Go and how the first slide that you saw on that had Lisa Dollin, who lost 4 games to 1. That was the last time that a human won a game against AlphaGo or AlphaGo Zero. There were moves made in that game by the AI that had people gasping. That would have been, well, if a human had made that, they would have said, you're crazy. But it turned out later on to be genius because it won. And so we label that as being creative. To the AI, it's simply exploring a problem space. But that problem space could be research and development. AI has already been used to do things like design optimum chassis for cars that look nothing like the traditional ones, because they were just told, make it optimum for strength to weight, and it had no other constraints. So it looks something like an insect. It's not even symmetrical, but it does the job. But your greatest asset, paradoxically, is still creative thinking, because that embodies a large range of types of thinking, and the strategic creativity is something that AI cannot do. And finally, we have, well, you'd like to be disruptive services. Hard to say what these are at the moment, because they rapidly become non-disruptive services, like search engine optimization. It's pretty commoditized right now. But when you're out there on the bleeding edge, this is a good place to be, because as a startup, you're not vulnerable to commodity scale automation because you've only just invented the field. No one can scale automation to it yet. You can leverage AI to disrupt traditional markets. And these AI is becoming, excuse me, increasingly available to lower and lower price points, like even the solopreneur. There are ways of getting at it that companies like Amazon through SageMaker and others are making available to you. I've got some closing slides here from Peter Diamandis. You saw him earlier. Very good at thought leader type memes. So he says, you want to be these things, digitized. So this is how to leverage the disruption. Digitize means you share information at the speed of light. Use computer networks, not any other way that information moves around like letters. If you can do it through a network, there's a big difference. Exponential growth, as we've seen, is hidden until it explodes. Be aware of it. Educate yourself on it. By the time it's obvious to everyone, it's too late. Leverage disruption to overtake the incumbents. A dematerialized world, coming up with words like this is really what thought leaders do. I've got to get better at this. The value resides in information, not physical assets, because they are so much easier to move around and transform. And that provides demonetization, because some things that used to cost a lot of money now don't have to cost anything. Think about how the next copy of an AI is the cost of copying a program. It's like taking a file on your computer and saying, copy it from here to here. How long does that take? Well, that's how long it takes to make a new AI worker that can do the same thing as the first one. Mm-hmm. And that this has the potential for democratization. I think he's overly optimistic in here. I think whether it's democratized depends upon who's doing it and how and what their standards are. And this is something that we should focus on ourselves, is ensuring that. Mm. To leverage this in general, we need to become futures thinkers. And these lines I took from Zoe Prosser. The overall visualization of this is you project into a future version of yourself. And that enables these mindsets of thinking in the future, like Gretzky, right? Here around Canada, hockey, right? Skate to where the puck is going, not where it is. Mm-hmm. More and more important than ever in the future. Finally, some of you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have to have your physiological needs like food, shelter, money taken care of before you can look to things like safety and belonging and esteem and self-actualization. Self-actualization used to be the plaything of the privileged. Others were too busy just making sure that they could meet the mortgage. I suggest that in the future, the business that can survive this kind of transformation has to consider this pyramid to be inverted. That it will not survive unless its leaders understand who they are, what the company's purpose is, what their true mission is, and not what they're currently selling or what they say. And that is what is needed to serve the function of the business. Otherwise, that business will cease to exist. Its safety, its survival will not happen. And that is the measure of the transformation that is upon us. That's me. There's my book, my website, and my podcast. And I will turn this over to LowellAnn for mediating the remainder of whatever time we have.
I got them scanned in.
That was,
But I'm not gonna put them into SkySlope because it's gonna take a little more time. I wanna make sure it's done right the first time. If you wanna do it while I'm gone,
David,
you'll wait till I get back. It'll be about an hour.
somebody's got something playing they shouldn't. So I guess the question, the thing that jumped out for me, and I think I think you touched on it. I guess my question before we even talked about this was, can AI take over our relationships? And it seems that your message indicates no.
It depends on the relationship.
Yeah.
There was, for instance, customers of brokerages expressed a preference for an AI as a broker instead of the humans they've been dealing with. So if you're not curating that relationship well enough, your customers may ditch you. It does depend on that level of relationship. And if you think about the relationship between a customer service agent, that is a hot area for automation, or telemarketers. And that's that's a toxic relationship, if anything, easy to automate. So you have to look at the other end of the scale.
Mm-hmm. But I was also thinking about human service, nurses, and people who provide human service. I can't see how I can't see how AI would sort of take care of that.
Well, I had an example given to me, I think 2 weeks ago. Someone in a talk I was given said that at their local hospital, the children patients were being given robot pets to keep them company because the nurses were too busy to spend the time with them. That got me angry, because the AI should be used to automate the boring parts of the nurse's job.
Yes.
It's
No
not that
kidding.
it can't be used to make robot pets, but this is not the time to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, and I'm sure there are questions arising in everybody's mind. So, there is Vivek with his hand up. So go for it, Vivek.
you talked about reinforced learning. In that you mentioned reward. But how does a reward work when it is a robot?
Yeah, it's a human-centric term. It's not the way that the AI uses it. It is simply a target that, when it does a cycle of learning, or it does a cycle of execution, then it's graded. So here, you got a B+. Then it makes a little change to the way it did it, does it again. If it gets an A-, it goes, great, I will do more of that. If it gets a B, it says, I'll do less of that. This is the simplification of that. It scales over hundreds of thousands or millions of grades at different places, but you get the idea.
Interesting. Anybody else have any questions? David.
At the beginning, you were talking about computer power. To my thinking, the computer power is throttled back at the speed of light, unless there's another technology that can go faster than the speed of light. So once we reach where a computer is all light driven, that's when it can't go any faster.
We're nowhere close to that being a limiting factor. What happens in your brain right now is 1/10 of the speed of an electronic computer, and look what you can do with it. So the point at which the speed at which they communicate is a disadvantage. I can't imagine how long before we start worrying about that.
Alana.
So I understand that, we're feeding these computers data and they have to interpret the data and spit it out, as you say. How is it going to be able to interpret emotions? How are we going to be able to feed it emotion and have them react emotionally? So that's where we're going to separate the humans from the computers, right?
In some ways, they are further along in this field than your question suggests. And you asked two things. One was about them perceiving emotions. The other was about them expressing emotions. There is progress in both of those. There is a field called Emotion AI. Look for a talk by Rana El Kalioubi at TED. And it's titled something like "This Computer Knows How You Feel" by your face. And you can see demonstration of it interpreting someone's emotions from their facial expression. This is reliable enough to spark an industry that's growing and throwing a lot of money around. So although I'm hearing more and more about limitations to that being found right now, it is useful to some degree. The other question is about expressing emotion. I heard a demonstration probably about 2 months ago now of the voice behind the Amazon Echo. I'm not going to say her name because she's next to me on the desk, that could read a story. Now they can do that right now. There's an app where it'll read a story, but it's relatively flat. This was reading it with emotion that was targeted to the appropriate points in the story. And it was not just, you might expect it's going to sound like a robot tweaked a little bit. No, I am talking A-list voiceover artist quality, that good. I'm not saying it's going to replace those people doing that. I'm saying that was my reaction to it. Now, does it mean anything is there anything inside that feels that? No, not in any way that makes sense to us. But there are some of the boundaries of that field for you. It is, you have to adjust your thinking about where the edges are, because if you say no emotion, no, that's not true.
Wow. And I have a couple of comments that I just have to give, but I want to make everybody make sure everybody has the answers to any of their questions. Paul, anything come up for you?
I'm noticing more and more AI creeping isn't the right word, accelerating into the buying process as you are a customer of companies that you'll be asked certain things, and it's in some ways it's good because you're getting your questions answered without taking up any time really of the companies other than what they've invested into it, and it seems to be very, very good at that process. So I'm curious as to what the future of the salesperson is.
That would fall into one of the quadrants on the diagram I showed, which is don't focus on the things that rely on data and looking at spreadsheets and making charts and things like that. Not that kind of sales, but the contact with the person doing the big deal with the CEO, that kind of sale.
Yeah, when you realize that all sales are emotional,
yes,
emotion driven, that's the way to be focusing rather than fact driven. So,
but the fact that you can use tools now that are psychometric driven to target people precisely, so that each one gets a different message that's targeted to their particular makeup about your product. That and the AI can do that. You don't want to be competing with that.
No. Interesting. Thank you.
Wow. So, good to have you, Alana. Thanks for your message. Usually, I give Fred the opportunity. Oh, he's gone. Oh no, there he is. I usually give Fred the opportunity to have the last word, but I'm guessing his dogs are creating a problem. He doesn't seem to be there right now.
No,
So,
I'm here.
how
I'm
are
here.
you?
It's just that my internet is playing games, so I turned the camera off because.
Oh, right on.
But I would like to ask a question, if I may.
Oh, go for it.
Peter, I think the soft skills are very important. And as you know, I work with youth, and I have a survey that I have access to, and it's called 8 Pathways to Every Child's Success. And it measures, they answer a survey, and it gives them a ranking out of 5, how well they're doing in these 8 areas. I'll just read them quickly and get your comment on your thoughts on these are the things that are going to help them cope with the changing world they're in. Number 1 is empathy, then curiosity, sociability, resilience, self-awareness, integrity, resourcefulness, and creativity. Those are the 8 things we measure on a survey, and they get ranking, and then after they've been through some of the programs I'm promoting, maybe a year later they do the survey again and see how their ranking changed in those 8 areas. Any comments about that helping them to be successful in the future?
Oh, perfect. I might get that list from you. I couldn't have come up with a better one.
Yeah.
It's written by a lady in Washington State with PhD. She's got about 2 million people now using her survey around the world. And I have access to it as well, and it's free of charge. She has everything from families being able to do.
Fred's technology fails him sometimes. So, and I would be curious to know. Oh, there you are, Fred.
Okay.
The survey, does a person answer those questions about themselves? Or,
Yes.
Is that how it
Yes.
works? Okay.
Yes, other than the child, a young one, then the family answers about the child under the age of 10. But yeah, and then you can see where their strengths are and their weaknesses and help them work on those weaknesses. Okay.
Right.
So yeah, called the Compass survey. I can send access to that if anybody's interested. Yeah, I can send the website. I can in the chat if you want.
Well, and isn't it interesting that we're focusing on the quote soft skills when early in my career, those soft skills were we're saying, oh, that's just female stuff. I find this quite interesting and confirming from where I sit. But I guess before we close, I really found myself thinking as I was going through all of this and thinking, well, why don't we just let the machines have it? Let's go back to gardening. So,
hey, Fred, Daisy would like you to put that in the chat, please, that website.
I've put it in the chat. It's there right now.
Right on.
It's called Roots of Action.
All right. Okay.
It's there.
So before now, Fred, do you had a question, but do you have any desire to have the last word today?
I always do. So, Peter, wonderful presentation. It really makes us understand a lot more about what artificial intelligence is going to do to us and be around, and that we have to cope with it, all of us. So I think it's...
Oh. Well, There goes Fred's machine again. So I want to thank you so much, Peter. That was really thought-provoking. And as we think about all those D's that you mentioned there, certainly looking at each one of those in terms of the kind of work that we want to be in as solopreneurs, certainly be a good place to begin. So I really appreciate that. So thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I'm going to give us an outro for us to go.